Before we even get to all of the minute details, I'm going to start this off by saying that this show gets points from me for being the very first and only adaptation of anything Dune related so far to directly reference the God Emperor. When I heard them say the Tyrant, and when I heard them say Arafel, I got very excited. So they get tremendous points from me just on that simple fact alone. Now, if you don't understand what any of that means, don't worry, I'll explain it later. If you're already here, then I'm assuming that you don't care about some spoilers. I'm not going to completely spoil some of the books, some of the later books for everybody, but I am going to talk about some of the details of what happens in some of those books so that I can discuss what I think is being referenced in this show. And there's a lot that I think is being referenced subtly, and I have some theories about a lot of things that we're going to get into. First off, this show starts off with two very interesting quotes. Victory is celebrated in the light, but won in the darkness. And what holds more truth, history or prophecy? Two very Dune-ish quotes. And we also, in the opening monologue by Valia Harkonnen, we get her saying something like, perhaps the history involving the Butlerian Jihad between these figures called Vorian Atreides and Xavier Harkonnen is not exactly like what we've been told historically. This is a reference to something that happens in the Machine trilogy by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. It's really in the weeds. We won't get into that right now, but it's related to the origins of the feud between House Atreides and House Harkonnen. Alright, so the first 10 minutes of this show or so, first 10 to 15 minutes I would say, are interestingly enough like the entire Bene Gesserit plotline from the Brian Herbert Sisterhood of Dune trilogy that includes Mentats of Dune and Navigators of Dune. It's like that, but on fast forward. So basically, the first 15 minutes are a stripped down version of Brian Herbert's books, and then we skip all the way past that and are 30 years later, which I definitely agree with this choice, to not sit within the period depicted in Brian Herbert's books, and to skip over that entirely and do something totally different so that we can focus more on the lore created by Frank Herbert and not be tied to what happens in the Brian Herbert books. We can keep some of the more interesting aspects of those books, which they did, and they show those in the beginning. That's essentially what happens in the book with Mother Raquella being the first Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserit and starting the breathing program. Like in the book, Valia was one of her favorites. She ultimately leaves the sisterhood to be co-ran by her granddaughter, Dorothea, and then Valia uses the voice to get Dorothea to kill herself. That is basically what happens in the book, but kind of on fast forward, and they don't really mention an aspect in the book where they're trying to figure out how to create more Reverend Mothers, so that's still an open question as to whether or not Valia right now is the only Reverend Mother, or whether or not they have more Reverend Mothers at this point. It's not exactly clear to me. Now, I should be clear that I did hear that there are going to be some flashback scenes back to that 30 years before time period, so I think we can expect some scenes that might fill in some of the blanks, but I'm very happy that the main storyline is set outside of that. In the show, there is also something that is extremely interesting that happens, that they add, that's not in the Brian Herbert books, that I would like to talk about, and that is the mention of Tiran Arafel. Now this is a deep cut for Dune fans. This is a very deep cut, and this is a multifaceted reference that is related to the death of the God Emperor in Book 4 and his very last words, which are, "Do not fear the Ixians. They can make the machines, but they cannot create Arafel." Now this is a very easy to miss reference. Arafel is a Hebrew word that means fog. It basically represents the things about God that are unknowable, the obscured nature of God. but specifically in Dune, it is the cloud darkness of holy judgment. And this, in fact, points us to a very specific biblical quote. And we've talked about this on the channel before. Here's the entire quote. "The Lord reigneth. Let the earth rejoice. Let the multitude of isles be glad thereof. Clouds and darkness are round about him. Righteousness and judgment are the habitation of his throne. A fire goeth before him, and burneth up his enemies round about. His lightnings enlightened the world. The earth saw and trembled. The hills melted like wax at the presence of the Lord. At the presence of the Lord the whole earth. The heavens declare his righteousness, and all the people see his glory. Confounded be all that serve graven images, that boast themselves of idols. Worship him, all ye gods." And when I saw this episode of the show, and I remembered this Bible reference, and I remembered what Leto said on his deathbed, it all kind of started to click into place, and I started to figure out some of the things that they were doing. In the book God Emperor of Dune, when Leto says the Ixians can create the machines, but they cannot create Arafel, what he is saying is the Ixians can make a machine, a very powerful machine, a very intelligent machine, perhaps even one that is prescient, but they cannot create God. They cannot create a being that will be the ultimate judge for humanity, that will seek out and destroy all of humans. That is what he is saying. He's saying that I have protected you with the creation of Siona and the No Gene. I know that's very in the weeds for those of you that have not read the books. I have an entire giant series. Go check it out. But that is essentially what's going on here. They're making reference to this. Now, what's happening here is that we're being shown that the Bene Gesserit and Leto were trying to protect mankind from the same thing. But the Bene Gesserit were just a little bit misguided. That's why in Book 4 we see Leto take over the Bene Gesserit breeding program. He takes it from them at the end of Book 3, and it's his breeding program. In Book 4, he mentions that the Bene Gesserit, out of all those in the universe, are the most like him. They were almost right, but not quite. He needed to be there to kind of guide the wheels and put it back on track, because he saw Arafel as well. He saw the quote-unquote seeking machines. This gets me to my other point. In the Bible quote that I just read, we see the line, "A fire goeth before him and burneth up his enemies." That's exactly what we see in this episode. We see Desmond Hart, and he's got the quote-unquote magical power to burn people alive. This doesn't strike me as a magical power at all. This is Dune. It's not magic. It's some kind of technology. And if my gut is right, it is Ixian technology. The Ixians have always been known to push the bounds of the Butlerian Jihad. They have an interest in more lax laws where machines are concerned. And then there's the undeniable religious aspect to this, of course. In Dune, there are many different religions that grow from older religions. A lot of it is based in what they call the Orange Catholic Bible, which is obviously some kind of deep future shoot-off of Christianity, and religions and beliefs continue to grow and change in the Dune universe because we're dealing with thousands of years passing. It is not uncommon for religious groups in the Dune universe like the Tleilaxu to use forms of technology for religious purposes. That being said, whatever technology this is, likely Ixian technology, symbolically to Desmond Hart, it represents the fire that goeth before his Lord, whatever God he worships. Take a look at the rest of this Bible quote with me. "Confounded be all that serve graven images, that boast themselves of idol. Worship him, all ye gods." Who do we see staring at a graven image? At multiple times, we see the Mother Superior Valia staring at the graven image of Rakella. Confounded be all that serve graven images, that boast themselves of idols. Valia's sole existence, her sole purpose is to serve the will and to preserve the vision of Rakella. Rakella's literal graven image features prominently, almost as though it's religious iconography. But Bene Gesserit, what we're dealing with here is Desmond Hart is a fanatic serving some religious purpose. This fire-burning technology is mechanical. That's why he mentions earlier to the Emperor that perhaps they outlawed machines too soon. And another reason that I'm so gung-ho on this being Ixian technology is because, in my opinion, in the original Dune saga, I know that in the Brian Herbert Dune books they do something different and we'll get into that, but in my opinion, in the original Dune saga, Leto foresaw an Ixian machine that got out of hand and became prescient, became too powerful, and destroyed the entire human race. And that was what he was trying to prepare humankind for. And if you look at the specific quote in God Emperor of Dune, where his creation, Siona, is being given the vision that he had countless times before, it says, "No ancestral presences would remain in her consciousness, but she would carry with her forever and afterward the clear sights and sounds and smell. The seeking machines would be there, the smell of blood and entrails, the cowering humans in their burrows aware only that they could not escape. All the while the mechanical movement approached nearer and nearer, louder and louder. Everywhere she searched, it would be the same. No escape, anywhere." So, whereas in the Brian Herbert books, we have the very literal omnis AI entity coming from outer space to seek revenge on all of humanity, I think that in the original Dune saga, what Frank Herbert was really going for was something that humans created getting out of hand and just destroying us because of our own hubris, because we weren't diverse enough and we weren't protected enough and we weren't spread out enough into the universe. That was the whole point of the scattering later on. That was the whole point of Siona's no gene. It was meant to be scattered throughout the galaxy, so that something like this, something that was prescient, that had the potential to seek out all of humanity if we remained in the same place and if we were all the same, could no longer do it. It could no longer be Arafel. It could take out a lot of us. It could wipe out this entire solar system. It could take out a lot of us, but it couldn't take out all of us, and that was the point. That is what Leto was trying to prepare us for and protect us from. Leto II said that the Ixians can no longer create Arafel. He marks the Ixians as the threat that lead to the coming of Arafel, leads to the end of the human universe. As to what the show is going to do at this point in time, it's vague at this point. It could go either way. We do get shots of deep outer space and mechanical lights turning on and what sounds like a mechanical voice speaking. That could very well be Omnius, or it could be a reference to some other form of technology. It remains to be seen. It remains to be seen. Alright, so as I said, we mainly skip over the Brian Herbert stuff. We see the death of Rakella, we see Valia and Dorothea taking over and the Sisterhood kind of being split. We get a really nice Dune Orange Catholic Bible quote, "Thou shalt not disfigure the soul," which has always been one of my favorites. If you flip to the back of Dune and you look at the religion of Dune, you'll find that quote, and that was really cool that they included that. So I enjoyed that. The opening sequence was good, and they skipped 30 years, and now we've got all new material. I don't know where it's going, and that's exciting for me. So overall, I like the look of the Bene Gesserit. They've, at large, maintained the look and mostly the vibe of the Bene Gesserit from the Villeneuve stuff. So that was cool to see. I enjoyed seeing the Bene Gesserit girls training. So that was interesting. So we see a little bit of perhaps Prana Bindu training happening. We see a little bit of the Truth Sayer training occurring. Perhaps a little bit of the Weirding Way, which is the special Bene Gesserit martial arts. So there's a political situation that the Bene Gesserit are trying to maneuver at this point in history. So we have the union between House Riches and House Corino. Now they're saying Richeses, but I've always said Riches. I don't know. These are made up words, so I don't know. I'm just going to say Riches because that's the way I've always said it. So the Bene Gesserit are facilitating this union between House Riches and House Corino because they are very interested in this union between Pruitt Riches and Yanez Corino. So they really want this union to happen, and it's based off of the genetic archives, right? So they showed us that Rakella, the original Mother Superior, was building this huge genetic archive so that she could create leaders that they could control. And so they're still on this plan. But some things are happening to shake stuff up. There is some unrest. For one, the mysterious re-emergence of Desmond Hart, who the Emperor thought had died on Arrakis, and who should have died on Arrakis. It looked like he died during this Fremen attack. He should be dead. In my opinion, another prediction, I think he is a Gola. And a Gola is, of course, a Tleilaxu device, a clone of someone that has been killed, someone that's dead, that has been brought back to life, usually with an insidious purpose. And it seems like that insidious purpose is to undermine the Bene Gesserit in the eyes of the Emperor and undo what they're doing. We see him throughout the episode weaseling his way into the mind of the Emperor and downplaying the Bene Gesserit and making them seem less trustworthy in the eyes of the Emperor. So he's definitely got an agenda against the Bene Gesserit, and this is obviously the most evident at the end of the episode when Pruitt is burned alive, and at the same time Mother Kasha is burned alive. Now, he took out two threats at once. So one, he's undermined the Bene Gesserit breeding program. He's killed the match. Two, he's taken out Kasha, who is the main influence over Princess Yanez, and the Bene Gesserit's main influence over the Emperor. And he gave her a look earlier in the episode that some of you might have seen or might not have seen. So he did two things at once. It's not exactly clear how it's working, but my gut tells me that that's Ixian technology, and my gut tells me that he is a Tleilaxu Gola. So it remains to be seen what the death of Pruitt will mean for the future of this merger between House Reaches and House Carino, which the Emperor was kind of iffy on anyway, so it's kind of like Desmond Hart has forced his hand. But that gets me to one of the cool scenes from the show that I really liked a lot, was when you see the Emperor and you see the Duke Reaches having kind of a conversation and kind of debating, and the Bene Gesserit are both there watching, and each one of them has a truthsayer. But these truthsayers are Bene Gesserit women, so they're not on anybody's side except the Sisterhood. So it's really cool that we see them having their little secret conversation while these guys think that they're running things, but really it's the Bene Gesserit who are secretly in power. So they're saying like, oh, we'll deal with the Duke later. He wants a wing in the Carino's castle so that he can basically insist more power over the Landsraad. So they're saying that we'll deal with the Duke later. We just need to make this match happen. So it's just really cool to see that. I really love the scenes in Villeneuve's Dune, and I love the scenes. I'm happy that we're going to get more scenes in this, of just seeing the Bene Gesserit operate like Bene Gesserit and be those that secretly maneuver in the shadows. I really like that aspect of the Bene Gesserit. And like I said, I'm glad that we were able to skip past what we see depicted in the Brian Herbert stuff and get to the point when the Bene Gesserit act like Bene Gesserit, because I really had no interest in seeing the Bene Gesserit becoming the Bene Gesserit and slowly getting to the place where now they have the Bene Gesserit breeding program and now they're manipulating people. I'm glad we just skipped to the point where it's like, yes, they manipulate. Yes, they have a breeding program. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of that depicted in the show. So I enjoyed all the political stuff, the Carino stuff, the Ricci stuff. I liked the dynamic between the Emperor and his wife. It seemed like they might have had some love for each other in the past, but no longer. I was getting the vibe a little bit that maybe the Emperor had a thing for his truthsayer Kasha, which will be interesting because it seems like Kasha is dead now. So we'll see the fallout from this episode and what exactly occurs. Another interesting note that some people might miss was the presence of House Carino on Salusa Secundus. Salusa Secundus in, I guess, the current Dune timeline, in the Paul Atreides Dune timeline, by that point in time, is a prison planet where the Sardaukar are trained. So it's a very harsh, brutal planet. You see in this show that it's very lush and green. Well, this was before it was abused and destroyed. Dune has always had this kind of ecological message that, yes, through human activity, we can destroy planets and we can change planets. So yeah, that's the point I think of showing Salusa Secundus. It used to be the seat of House Carino until they moved to Kaitain, which is another paradise world. But at first, it was nice. It became a prison planet. It became a place similar to Arrakis where they could train, soldiers in a harsh environment. So that was interesting to see as well. Another thing that I thought was very interesting in this show was the use of prescient visions. Now, it's not clear when prescience came into being amongst humans, but it is related to the Bene Gesserit's way of training themselves. It is related to their breeding program, so it is not a stretch that certain Bene Gesserit would have prescient abilities. We got Raquel's prescient vision at the beginning of the show, and we also get Kasha also having a prescient vision, which was very interesting. She kind of sees herself as the center of this eye, and she sees a giant sandworm come and it swallows the Princess Yanez. She says, "This is your fault," and I think she's not saying it directly to Kasha, she means the Bene Gesserit. And so everyone is swallowed by the sandworm, and that could have a lot of potential meanings. I mean, it's pointing towards the fact that they're going in the wrong direction. Things like the meaning of the rotten pomegranate with the maggots in it, after seeing the pomegranate scene earlier, obviously refer to the fact that this union between House Reaches and House Carino is not the right direction, and it will only lead to perhaps death. It will bear rotten fruit, I think. So it makes sense that prescience would emerge amongst some Bene Gesserits. Of course, the most refined version of prescience that we ever see in the books, is Leto II's prescience. So obviously there are degrees of prescience. There's the prescience that guild navigators have. There's the prescience that O'Drade has, like her subtle, little talent. It's not quite there. So there's the prescience that different people have to varying degrees. So that makes sense to me. I also have some interesting thoughts about the overall aesthetic of the show. So I think that Wallach 9, the home of the Bene Gesserit right now, kind of looks more like the Villeneuve stuff. And that is interesting to me because it feels like that over the course of the next 10,000 years, as the Bene Gesserit become more and more influential, maybe their style takes over and becomes more dominant in the universe. And that's why we get the more brutalist, minimalist aesthetic by the time of Paul Atreides. I think that is a cool way to think about it as well, because the Bene Gesserit look more or less like they do in Villeneuve's Dune, but everything else looks a bit different. So I think that's an interesting way to think about it, and I wonder if the creators of the show did this intentionally. I hope so. So overall, I did enjoy the show a lot, but there were some things that I did not like as much. For one, I don't think we needed a nightclub scene in a Dune show. I feel like nightclub scenes, bar scenes in sci-fi stuff is way too overdone. It's very generic. I sighed when I saw it. I don't mind the weird drug stuff, because even the David Lynch Dune had weird drug stuff. Dune is all about weird future drugs. That's fine. But I really don't want a stupid generic nightclub scene that kind of took me out of it. I'm not gonna lie. That could have been left on the cutting room floor. I want weirder things. This is the Dune universe. I get that it's 10,000 years ago, but we don't need a bar scene in Dune ever. Please don't show it again. But overall, I really enjoyed the show, but I think it still remains to be seen as to whether or not the full season is going to have a satisfying arc. Because while I think the first episode is pretty solid, it does set up a lot of mysteries that are going to need to be satisfyingly addressed by the end of, I think, this first season. What I can say is I appreciate the show for what it's trying to do. I appreciate them for including some more obscure references to things that happen later in the Dune series, and I hope that we get a glimpse of the God Emperor by the end of this show. I hope that someone has a vision of him and that we see some depiction of him, and I hope that it doesn't suck. At this point, I'm optimistic about the show, and I hope it's good and successful, because this show being good and successful gives me more hope for maybe, a God Emperor of Dune show on HBO in the future, or a Children of Dune TV show on HBO in the future. So if this show is a hit and it's well received, then we might be in for a lot more Dune content in the future.